Hey, Travis with TCustomz Productionz, TCustomz.com. Today I'm stepping you inside of a sample-based hip-hop instrumental that I finalized a few weeks back and was actually uploaded to the club members area. Has not been added to the public catalog yet, but will be added there very soon. It's not super complex. I am primarily using part of a loop, which I don't do too often. There's only about 10 tracks total, I think, in this entire beat. So hopefully you can take something away from it. I do have commonalities when I'm working on my beats, but also some of my approaches and techniques might be a little different from track to track, especially in this case where I'm primarily using a loop. First, I just wanted to step through my process for getting the tempo of this track started, because that's a question I get asked a lot, is how do I get the BPM for my track? How do I find the BPM of a sample? And I usually manually do this, and especially if I'm chopping in MIDI, if I have my MIDI chops, I'm not as concerned about the BPM at the beginning. I can kind of fill that out as I go along. It can change. I may start out at 85 BPM, and then by the end of the beat, I'm at 87 or 88, just because I've done some further manipulation and kind of found that pocket works better. For this particular track, because I am working with a good portion of a loop, it was a little bit different approach. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this just to give you a sense of how I started this. So I didn't have obviously any effects or anything. This is kind of my raw sample here. So because the sample is a little slower, I went ahead and just started transposing it. And for those of you who know, the transposition is going to actually pitch that sample up to a higher key, and at the same time it's going to speed it up. So that's why when you see me change this transpose, you're going to see this audio shorten. And so I ended up pitching it up about 3 half steps. And I just did this by ear, and it was more for the tempo. And with that 3 half step transpose, that got me at around 79 BPM. Now, once I had it transposed is when I actually enabled the warp engine, and this is where I actually did some time stretching to sync it up to the grid, drag over and get my warp markers to time stretch this a little bit. And as you can see, this is kind of how my final time stretch looks for this part of the loop. Here's something else that I did as I'm finding different sections of the sample that I wanted to use. Is I used a technique of crossfading, which I haven't really experimented with too much. I've used the crossfading before, but not in this particular way of actually blending 2 parts of the sample to make the loop a little more cohesive. But this was a technique that I found that kind of worked for me here. And just to play you what this sounds like without the crossfade. See, this sounds kind of weird right here, where this is building up and then this kind of drops down to a little kind of quiet where the loop is starting again. So when I enabled this crossfade, now you can hear what this sounds like. A lot smoother transition. You're taking those loud parts and the quiet parts and kind of evening them out. It's a lot of trial and error of finding the right points that you want to crossfade and things like that. But I did this at several places in the loop. Another thing that I did kind of as part of the arrangement as I was finalizing this track, as you can see right here, I've got this little drop. And so instead of just keeping that silent, I went ahead and enabled a ping pong delay to kind of fill up the space. And so it sounds like this. Brought that in a couple parts throughout the track. The rest of it was not really that interesting. It was really nuanced as far as finding the different pieces of the sample and matching them together and all of that. And the next part for me was to add drums underneath of that. So I wanted a kick and snare, even though there's a kick and snare in the sample, I wanted more impact for those. For the kicks, I'm actually layering 2 from my drum sample pack volume 4. This is kick number 1 and kick looks like number 18. And the snare, just a single snare. It came from one of my other sample packs. The trick now is to make sure that your drums that you add are syncing up with the drums from this loop. Usually if I'm chopping a sample up in MIDI format, and it's chopped on a kick or snare. If I don't want those, then I can use an attack and I can kind of get rid of a lot of that drum information to make room for my own drums, and I don't ever have to really worry too much about a conflict. But when working with a loop like this, it's a little more crucial that you actually align your drum sounds pretty much on point with what's here, because what can happen is you can lose impact from your drums if the drums that you're layering are not hitting down simultaneously. So you want to do your best to get those synced, and there's different ways to do that. You can zoom in and look at this audio. You can create a MIDI track right below it, and you can manually click in and say, okay, this is hitting here. I need my kick to hit right here, or my snare to hit right here, and you can go through and do it that way. With Ableton, you can also extract a groove. So the algorithm will go through, analyze the audio file, and try to extract where those kicks, where those transients are happening, extract that groove. And so you can basically extract the groove from any audio file and apply that to your MIDI track. So that's one way to do it. And I actually started that technique. Now just keep in mind with that, it's not always perfect, and the transient that Ableton detects may not be exactly what you want. So you still may have to do some additional shifting from that. That's still one way to get you started. If you've been using Ableton for a while, you may have already experimented with converting audio to MIDI. You could definitely go down here, convert the drums to new MIDI track. And then once you have this information, you can delete what you don't need. Here's the kick and snare track. And like I said, you got to be careful. You got to look at some of this and make sure that it's correct, because it's not going to be perfect. Once you have that right, then you can basically substitute in whatever additional drum samples you want and just replace the stock sounds that Ableton has created. The groove that I extracted was not getting exactly the sound that I wanted, and so instead of trying to spend more time on that, I just went ahead and manually clicked it in, manually made adjustments that way, listened back. If something sounded off, then I would make a micro adjustment, maybe shift it over 10 milliseconds, or just experiment with it that way. So that's the way that I got my additional drums synced up to the drums in the sample. So to complement sample and the drums, I just went ahead and added a really subtle, just some sub bass, kind of an open track for the most part. It's not really bass driven too much. Felt like it fit well with the groove and the drums that were there. So some extra low information. I loaded a single bass note from the TCustomz bass sample pack into an Ableton sampler. That just enables me to spread this single bass note across the keys. Just rounded off a little bit of the high information on this high note that I didn't want to come through up here. Okay, so this is where I started experimenting with some different effects. How can I spice the track up? Maybe some transitional sounds. I started digging into some of my virtual instruments, try to find some sounds that would complement it. I did go back and find several vocal stabs, as you can see here, from the same sample, which we'll get into. But I also went to some of my virtual instruments, in particular Omnisphere, and was going through some of the effect sounds, the transition sounds. I can't remember what category it was in. Found some sounds, some effect sounds that already had some cool automation. You may go through some of your sounds and they already have maybe some LFOs applied, or they have some sort of panning or some automated filtering that's already within the effects of that particular sound. And obviously you can go in and tweak. If you're into sound design and you like to go in and do a lot of that stuff, you can create that stuff yourself within most of your plugins. And so with the one patch, just by triggering different keys at different times, I was able to generate a number of really cool sounds like this. So to give myself more control over the sounds, I went ahead and just froze them down, rendered them down to audio, and chopped them up kind of just into little audio sound bites that I could add at different places throughout the track. There's about at least 4 or 5, maybe 6 different variations of this sound that play through the track. It sounds like this. Next up, again going back to the sample, finding some various sound bites. I picked this little stab, broke it into 2 parts, and added a ping pong delay to the second half. Now I have several vocal stabs that I filtered and again put some additional delay and things like that. You got this sound. Got a little baby stab. Finding a lot of these sounds is experimentation. It's not like I know exactly what's going to work. I'll play what I have finished on a loop, and I will kind of scan through certain sounds. I'll put a high threshold a lot of times on my filters. That way I can remove a lot of that low information. It allows me to more easily hear how those sounds would complement the beat. If I have a stab that I think sounds pretty cool, then I'll try to further manipulate it. If that means adding a delay or adding an attack or whatever. And this was one more sound. I'll just play this track back from here, and I'll try to select and highlight these different effects and vocal stabs when they come in throughout the track. Adding some of these effects was part of the arrangement process. I've talked about before, if you have problems with trying to arrange your beats, a lot of times acapellas, if you have industry acapellas that you can use to kind of judge and give you a better perspective on what it would sound like with actually an MC or a singer or whatever type of artist over that beat, that may give you some additional guidance. And then just, again, using your ear. Every particular arrangement doesn't have to be a verse, hook, verse, hook. Some people may argue against that, but I say just sounds good. If it's something that an artist could take and create a song to, or you have a particular vision for how you see that song coming to be, don't be afraid to experiment with that. For most people, this may not be a traditional formatted track. There are plenty of hip-hop beats that do not stick to a certain mold as far as the formatting and arrangement. If you did enjoy the video, please make sure to like, subscribe if you're not. I do read all the comments. All my social media and contact information for serious inquiries will be in the description, and feel free to check out the channel for other related videos like this one. Thanks again, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.